All right, we want to keep things on time tonight, so we're going to kick things off. Good evening, welcome everyone to the end of the line, Great Lakes over Big Oil. My name is Ashley Rodzinski. I'm the Climate and Environment Program Director for Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities. I really want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. We are just so honored to be joined by so many people who care about our Great Lakes, our climate, and our communities, both here in the room and the hundreds who are tuning in from across Michigan, the region, from states like Hawaii to New York, and even Canada. Hi to Enbridge. Tonight, we gather at a critical inflection point. Just last week, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers released its draft environmental impact statement for the proposed Line 5 oil tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac. What should have been a thorough, science-driven review has been overshadowed by political pressure and an unsubstantiated declaration of an energy emergency. Let's be honest, there is no energy emergency. There is, however, a ticking time bomb in the Great Lakes and a true climate emergency at hand. This energy emergency simply serves to fast-track a Canadian oil company's profits at the expense of our waters, our economy, and our way of life. If we care about improving our regional energy security and our national independence, then we need to be investing in the cheapest forms of energy around, which are solar and wind, not fossil fuels. Plus, experts have testified that Line 5 is not essential to meeting our Michigan's energy needs. A recent PLG report confirms that there are already viable alternatives to meet our energy demand without threatening our Great Lakes or Michigan's economy. Enbridge's own experts have testified in federal court that shutting it down would raise gas prices by less than a penny per gallon. And the truth is, we don't need Line 5. The risks far outweigh the benefits. Line 5 has already spilled a documented 35 times, releasing more than 1.1 million gallons of oil in its 72-year lifespan. And for context, that's the equivalent of the Kalamazoo oil spill. Yet Enbridge is the company that we're supposed to trust with 20% of the world's fresh surface water. Let's also remember what's at stake economically. Our Great Lakes support a booming $29.3 billion tourism industry, a vibrant commercial shipping industry, drinking water for more than 40 million people, and a rupture in Line 5 would put more than 214,000 tourism jobs at risk. Here in Traverse City and across Michigan, it's evident how vital these tourism jobs are to our local economies and to our families. Plus, according to a state commission study, decommissioning Line 5 would actually create more jobs than building Enbridge's Line 5 tunnel. So when Enbridge says this story is good for Michigan and Michigan's economy, they're simply not telling you the whole story. Opposition to Line 5 is not just about climate and economics, it's also about justice. Roughly 1/3 of Line 5's oil is refined at the Detroit Marathon refinery, located in one of the most polluted zip codes in the country. This predominantly black neighborhood has asthma rates 46% higher than the state average, and residents live day to day with this industrial pollution. We know that expanding fossil fuel infrastructure doesn't just endanger the planet, it entrenches us in environmental injustice. Plus, the proposed tunnel ignores the climate crisis. Expert testimony in the Michigan Public Service Commission case showed that building the Line 5 oil tunnel would lead to annual emissions of 27 million metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. And that's the equivalent of bringing 7 new coal-fired power plants online. It defies common sense to move this project forward in a time of sickening wildfire smoke, costly and destructive ice storms, and pest species like ticks proliferating across our state. We must stop investing in fossil fuel infrastructure today. Now here's the bottom line. If the Army Corps won't do its job to protect the people and the environment of Michigan, then the state must. Michigan has a legal obligation to review how this tunnel would impact our lake bed and our waters, and under the Great Lakes Submerged Lands Act. They must consider heavily the 20,000 gallons of drilling fluid that Enbridge plans to release into the Great Lakes and the harm to adjacent wetlands, air quality, wildlife, and on top of that, noise and vibration from years of drilling and blasting under the straits. We are calling on Governor Whitmer and the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy to uphold their public trust duty, act in defense of our shared waters and our collective future. Governor Whitmer and Director Roos, don't ink up that rubber stamp. Tonight, you're going to hear from an incredible lineup of speakers. I want to note that they are representing their own views tonight, not necessarily those of Groundwork Center. And we're going to start with Frank Zinn, whose family farm was devastated by the 2010 Enbridge Line 6B spill, the worst inland oil spill in U.S. history. Frank's story is a stark reminder of what happens when we don't hold corporations accountable. After that, we'll hear from Sean McBrearty, the State Director of Clean Water Action and the Campaign Coordinator for Oil and Water Don't Mix. Sean will update us on the current state of the Line 5 fight and where we go from here. Next, we'll hear from Frank Edowagishik, an Odawa elder and Executive Director of the United Tribes of Michigan. Frank will address concerns regarding Indigenous sovereignty, water protection, and the responsibilities that we all carry to defend these sacred waters. After that, we'll hear from Brian O'Mara, a geological engineer with over 30 years of experience who provided expert testimony in the Line 5 tunnel case. He'll explain the engineering flaws and the safety risks that Enbridge doesn't want you to hear about. Finally, we'll hear from Liz Kirkwood, Executive Director of For Love of Water, FLOW, and one of the legal thought leaders in this fight. She'll walk us through the legal landscape and describe the action that we must take that we must demand from our state. When the panel wraps, we are thrilled to share a special video message from Bill McKibben, author, climate leader, and founder of 350.org and Third Act on the power of the grassroots action and the growing national resistance against Line 5. Then it'll be your turn to weigh in and ask some questions of our esteemed panel here. We'll have about hopefully 20 minutes to answer audience questions. And we apologize to those joining us virtually. We're only going to be able to answer audience questions from those here in person tonight, but if you have a burning question, please put it in the chat, and we will definitely follow up. For those here in person, please also stick around for some networking and to enjoy some live music from the Blue Jazz Working Group, which is Sean McBrearty's band. Woo! And because tonight is about coming together, it's about truth and science and justice, but most of all, it's about power. The power of the people in this room and those across the region, because when we raise our voices together, we know that we are an unstoppable force for good. So together, we will shut down Line 5. All right, so let's dive in. I'm thrilled to begin by introducing Frank Zinn. Frank earned a doctorate in urban and regional planning from the University of Michigan. He worked first as a member of the faculty at Michigan State University, go green, and later at the University of Michigan, where his focus was on health and development interventions in low-income countries. He worked on a range of programs sponsored by organizations like the USAID, the World Bank, United Nations, and others. Throughout his life, he spent a great deal of time with his grandparents and other family at his family farm in Marshall, Michigan. At the time of the oil spill in 2010, he and his family were actively planning a meaningful future for the project. So Frank, please take it away.
Thank you. Slide. So this is a tough job because I've got a 100-year story that I have to tell in 10 minutes. So I'm going to talk fast and not go into a lot of detail, and we can talk more later if you're interested. Here you can see, to situate the farm, on the left is a map that shows the rupture point in Marshall, Michigan. I want to point out the direction of the flow, which is west to east, and I also want to point out the Edmonton Control Center, which is 1,800 miles from Marshall, which is where all the decisions were made by Enbridge as they were deciding to start and restart the line. To the right, you can see a picture or a map of the farm. To the north are two farmhouses. This was originally two farms. You can also see the pipeline easement that runs through about a third of the way down. To the left of that is the pumping station that was pumping the oil west to east. To the east, you can see the spill point. I put a big arrow there. It was just a few yards from the border of the property. I'll also point out the Crystal Lake there just south of the pumping station, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And also note that most of this farmland was not developed or not cultivated. It was in its natural state. Next. So where did the farm come from? This is my great-grandparents on the left, Frank and Delph Schaefer. He was a Ford dealer in Marshall, Michigan, and he bought the farm sometime in the 20s. The family story is he bought it because a lot of farmers couldn't afford the price of a new Ford car or truck, and they wanted to barter livestock for those vehicles. So he had the farm to store the livestock. To the right is their daughter, Burl Zinn, who married my grandfather, Frank Zinn, on June 5th, 1932. That's a wedding picture, and today is their 93rd wedding anniversary. They bought the adjacent farm in 1947. Now, they started their lives in New York City, well, they started their lives in Michigan, moved to New York City. He was a lawyer for RCA, and she was a social worker that worked for a Presbyterian hospital. They started their family in New York, and in 1947 decided they wanted to move back to Michigan to be closer to family. And so they bought that adjacent farm. I'm sorry, can you go back for 1 second? And to the right, you can see 50 years. This was their 50th wedding anniversary, and 3 generations, 4 kids and 10 grandkids, all on the porch of the farmhouse. Okay, next. So the first time we came across or had a meeting with the pipeline company, it was then called Lakehead. And my grandfather got a letter that basically said they were going to put a pipeline under his farm. And he didn't much like that, so he called my father, who was an attorney in Detroit at the time, and said, "You got to help me fight this thing." And my father said, "You know, Dad, you're going to lose." And he said, "I know, but I need to make a point." So in a hearing at the courthouse in front of a judge, the chief engineer for Lakehead Pipeline was asked by my father a hypothetical question: what would happen if the line broke at this point? And there's about 2 pages of hemming and hawing that I didn't include in this, but you can see at the bottom the final answer was you're going to have 3 redundant cutoff systems, so there'd never be any problem of any kind of an oil spill. Next. Just to give you a quick idea, this is the life of the farm. This is my dad and his siblings in 1947, just before they moved. We did a lot of camping and hiking and family events on the farm over the years. That's actually me in the front of those lower 2 pictures. Next. In the 1990s, when my grandparents got older and passed away, my dad and his siblings took over the farm, and they restored it to indigenous prairie under a state conservation program. And so those cultivated areas were actually quite beautiful. On the right are my 2 daughters digging holes to plant trees as part of that project. Next. We then had an idea in the aughts that we want to do something to honor the legacy of my grandparents and so forth. So we came up with a concept with a good family friend who's a developer in Chicago who'd done a lot of very innovative things. And it was going to be a community vineyard that was going to be LEED certified and have a lot of cool aspects that I don't really have time to talk about. Next. What we didn't know at that time was that Enbridge had quite a history of spills. According to the stuff I've read, 610 of them and 5.5 million gallons between 1999 and 2008. Not only had they had the spills, but they knew there were problems under the section of pipeline that ran through Marshall. And they had detected those problems in their own maintenance procedures. They didn't address the problems. There was 500 instances of corrosion. They only repaired 41. And unfortunately, the federal enforcement was quite weak, and they got a lot of citations and warnings, but they were never forced to do anything. Next. Enbridge, to put everybody's mind at ease, came up with a 10-minute rule, and the rule basically was if they couldn't explain any alarm bell going off on the pipeline within 10 minutes, they would isolate that section and shut it down, so there would never be a problem. Next. They even testified in front of Congress 10 days before the Kalamazoo River spill that that rule was going to be enforced and there would never be a problem. Next. So the next time we come in contact with the oil company, the pipeline company, is in July of 2010, the day of the spill, 6 o'clock. The alarm bells start ringing in Edmonton, and as the pipeline breaks, it was part of a 10-hour planned shutdown. Again, 10 minutes passed, but a lot more than 10 minutes passed as they didn't do anything as oil was leaking out. About, 4 o'clock a.m., they decided they need to restart the pipeline, even though the alarm bells were still ringing. They ran it for an hour and then turned it off because the alarm bells was still ringing. And then they turned it on again a couple hours later and ran it for another 40 minutes and then turned it off. And it wasn't until 17 hours and 17 hours, 19 minutes later that they finally acknowledged that there was a spill. And that was because one of the other utility companies in the Marshall area called them to notify them that that had happened. Never sent anybody out to look at it, never shut anything down, everything was left open. Next. So the 10-hour rule was not followed. Alarm bells were going out. They estimate the first restart pumped about 500,000 gallons into Talmadge Creek, the second half about 250,000 gallons. And of course, the overall size of the spill was about 1 million gallons. Next. Here's a picture of the pipeline. This is the corrosion that they knew about. It was about a 6-foot gash that everything came out of. Next. This is what our property looked like from the air about a week later. Next. These are shots on the right that we took on the ground when we were out a week or two later. Next. This is what the cleanup crew looked like. Everybody had to wear hazmat suits and masks and so forth. Next. And this is the same camera angle before and after. The top picture was taken a few weeks before the spill by my uncle. The bottom picture was taken a few weeks after the spill. Next. So what happens? There's a cleanup. The first thing they tell us 2 days after the spill, don't worry, everything's going to be better than it was before. They took control of about 45 acres in the middle of the property, used as a staging area. We thought we'd be kind of consulted as things went on, but it didn't really work out that way. And so we ended up having to kind of monitor things as best we could, but decisions were really made without our input. And as you'll see, mature trees were destroyed, a house was demolished. That little lake I pointed out earlier was completely drained in order to do a pressure test on the line to get it up and restarted. The line, by the way, was restarted within 7 weeks, I think, whereas the Kalamazoo River as a whole was closed for 3 years. And of course, we found unreported spills from frac tanks that were on the edge of the property. Next. The impacts of the spill, you all know this, more than 1 million gallons. It was tar sands oil, and I say this because Enbridge never acknowledged that it wasn't conventional oil. Tar sands is a very thick, viscous. You need to treat it in order to push it through the pipe. When it gets exposed to the environment, it sinks. So their whole cleanup plan was designed on the idea that it was a skimming operation off the surface of the water. In fact, it really needed to be a dredging operation. All right, and so go back just for 1 second. And so they were forced by the EPA to restart the cleanup because they hadn't done it adequately. 35 miles of the river was closed, 154 homeowners saw their property, and the EPA acknowledged that 5% of the oil would never be recovered, so it's still there. Next. Consequences for Enbridge, they paid huge fines, but I'll just jump ahead and show you something. If you look at their, next slide. If you look at their stock price, I defy you to find the point at which that oil spill happened. You can't really see it. There's a dotted line down from where it says 25.25, but the trajectory of the stock price is undeterred by the largest inland oil spill in history. Next. Our last meeting with Enbridge was really after working with them for 3 years. We kind of gave up and decided we needed to file a lawsuit. We settled a year later after dealing with this whole thing for 4 years, and Enbridge purchased the farm. Next. Lessons I learned, this is maybe as common sense, but pipeline companies write the regulations. I learned that very soon on, because Enbridge said over and over again, we never violated any of the regulations that we were subjected to. Regulations are not well enforced and penalties are insufficient to change behavior. Pipeline companies don't eliminate risk, they manage risk, and they carry insurance. So a lot of the costs and the penalties of cleanup are paid by insurance companies, not by Enbridge. Companies serve their stockholders, not landowners or communities. And of course, once oil spills, no one can put it back in the bottle. Next. The last thing I'll just point out is I've got 2 pieces of further reading if you're interested. On the left is the NTSB report, which is very damning, both of Enbridge and of the regulators, so it's really worth a read. On the right, if you're interested, my mother, who's now 90 years old, is writing children's books, and that's The Farmhouse, and those are stories from the original farm. My wife illustrated the book, by the way. So anyway, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for sharing your remarks, Frank. You know, I've worked on this campaign for many years now, and I feel like I still learn from your insights, and just, yeah, what a compelling story you have. I also want to remind folks that the bar is open during this presentation. That was a lesson we learned from a version of this event last year, so if you do need a drink midway through, the bar will be open the whole time. Next up, I'm going to introduce Sean McBrearty. Sean is the Michigan State Director for Clean Water Action. He began his career with the organization in 2011 as a canvasser in Lansing, quickly rising through the ranks, serving as the field manager, canvas director, and later as the legislative and policy director. In 2023, he took on the role of state director, where he continues to lead advocacy efforts to protect Michigan's water and environment. Sean brings over a decade of experience in environmental organizing, public policy, and legislative work, shaped by a lifelong commitment to clean water and community health. Welcome, Sean.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ash, and thanks everybody for coming out tonight. So I wanted to cover a little bit about this campaign, Oil and Water Don't Mix, of which, of course, Groundwork and all the other orgs who are co-hosting here tonight are a part. Because really over the last 10 to 12 years at this point, from 2013 until now, you know, activists, indigenous leaders, all sorts of groups, affected property owners like Frank, folks all across the state coming from different perspectives have worked together to build what is the most tenacious environmental campaign we've probably seen in Michigan history. We, you know, are taking on one of the richest and most powerful industries in the history of the world. And, you know, Frank said in his presentation that pipeline companies are writing the regulations, and that's 100% accurate. Whether it's in Lansing or whether it's in Washington, D.C., whether the Republicans are in charge or whether the Democrats are in charge, it is the well-moneyed corporate interests that write the rules that govern us, unfortunately. It's the corrosive influence of money in politics that we're dealing with. And when it comes to the oil industry, we're dealing with that more than with most industries. I'm sorry, next slide, please. So I did want to go over a little bit. Everybody's, I'm sure, seen this map of the Line 5 potential oil spill impacts. When we look at what devastation was caused by the Kalamazoo oil spill, you know, a 17-hour spill where they spilled 1.1 million gallons of oil, it's important to remember, A, that it was only a 17-hour spill because of Enbridge's negligence. B, that Line 5 runs 23 million gallons of oil a day, and even Enbridge, according to Enbridge in court, which, by the way, never believe Enbridge's PR. They are not bound by the truth in their public statements. Believe their experts when they're testifying in court under oath, because their experts tell a wildly different story. And luckily, through the course of this campaign, we've been able to get them on the record. According to Enbridge's own experts, the fastest Enbridge could shut down this pipeline is in 23 minutes. In 23 minutes, we'd lose at least 500,000 gallons of oil into the Straits. This worst-case scenario, supposed worst-case scenario spill is based on a 1.1 million gallon spill, which would be a spill in which the pipeline is shut down in less than an hour. If it went 17 hours, it would be a lot worse than this. Next slide, please. So after the Kalamazoo oil spill, again, activists, indigenous communities and leaders and folks across the state came together and really started looking at Enbridge's pipeline infrastructure. And that's when my good friend Beth Wallace at National Wildlife Federation put together the Sunken Hazards Report, which really started revealing the problems with Line 5 back in 2013. We spent years working to raise the profile of this issue. By the end of 2013, we had made Bill Schuette, our Attorney General at the time, say that Line 5's days are numbered. And then the Snyder administration put up a Pipeline Safety Advisory Board, which, it's an advisory board that's meant to do nothing and successfully did nothing for several years. We knew in 2014 that Snyder and Schuette were not taking this seriously. And so we made it part of our campaign plan to raise the profile of this issue and ensure that in 2018, every candidate for governor and attorney general had to take a position on Line 5. We had to make this a hot issue for politicians. The only way to beat the corporate influence in our system is through mass action and grassroots pressure. And that's what we've worked to do on this issue. This picture is one of my favorite protests we put on, where we had Clifford the horse, who you can see here, full on in his Christmas regalia, walking into Governor Snyder's office. Clifford's from Drummond Island. He would have been one of the first impacted Michigan residents from a spill. And you can't really see, but in front of him is Santa Claus, who was delivering coal to Governor Snyder that year. This picture made the front page of the Detroit News, part of how we're able to raise the profile of issues like this. Next slide, please. So, of course, in 2018, we were able to elect a candidate for Attorney General in Attorney General Nessel, who, when she was asked, and in fact, this day that this picture was taken at the Mackinac Policy Conference in 2019, a reporter asked Attorney General Nessel, "Aren't you afraid that taking all this work on Line 5 is going to make you lose the election in 2022? And her response was, "I ran for Attorney General to shut down Line 5, not to win a re-election 3 years from now." She's held true to that. She's been tenacious on this, pushing in court since 2019. We were able, in 2019, this was a big event. We had this many people gathering at Mackinac Policy Conference to protest. For those of you who may not have heard of Mackinac Policy Conference, it's an event that they hold every year on the island that costs between $4,000 and $5,000 a head to enter the Grand Hotel during that conference. It's before you take into account lodging and things like that. If you haven't heard of it, it's because you're not supposed to have heard of it. It is an event made for lobbyists. For lobbyists of wealthy corporations to lobby our elected officials in a comfortable setting far away from us riffraff. So we like sending people to the island during that and making it a little bit less comfortable. Part of our job as organizers, I always consider part of our job being to comfort the afflicted and another part of our job being to afflict the comforted. And we like doing that up on the island. So next slide. You can see how we grew. This is our protest last week on Mackinac Island. And so, despite the fact that Enbridge is spending upwards of $8 million a year in ads against us just here in Michigan, despite the fact that they're spending their money literally buying out gas stations for the day in small towns and pumping free gas for people while they tell them about how much they need Line 5, despite all of that and their efforts in the press to make it look like we're a marginalized group, our movement is growing. Our movement is continuing to grow. And again, it's not going to be the laws that come to the rescue here. The Army Corps of Engineers released a sham of a study on Friday that frankly started as a sham of a study during the Biden administration and only got worse with the new administration coming in. Again, Democrats or Republicans, it's corporations making the choice here unless we have a mass movement of people standing up and saying no. So the Army Corps study we never expected to be a thing that would help us shut down Line 5. Back in 2021, when the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy was the first group to issue permits for Line 5, we warned them back in 2021 that you, through the public trust doctrine, which I'm hopeful that Liz will talk about here in a minute, are the agency who should be overseeing environmental impacts of tunneling through the bottomlands of the Great Lakes. And Eagle, unfortunately, in 2021 decided not to employ their authority under the Great Lakes Submerged Lands Act to investigate the environmental impacts of tunneling under the Great Lakes before they issued the permits. They only looked at the north and south shore of the straits. The Michigan Public Service Commission only looked at building a pipeline inside the tunnel, not the impact of constructing the tunnel. The Army Corps took so little into consideration that the 6 tribal community partners that we had who were consulting organizations pulled out as consulting organizations on the EIS because their opinions were not being taken seriously by the Army Corps. The Army Corps is taking less of a look than Public Service Commission or than Eagle's initial permits. Luckily, Enbridge screwed up their initial permits at Eagle, and they have to go back to scratch. And what we said in 2021 has come true. Nobody so far in this permitting process has looked at the actual environmental impacts of building a tunnel through the most sensitive part of the bottomlands of the Great Lakes. So we're hopeful that Eagle is going to do that this time. And you know, Eagle has been receptive so far to our concerns. They're actually going to be considering, you can go on the Oil and Water Don't Mix or Clean Water Action or probably any organization represented here. You can go on our websites right now and make comment to the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and we've been guaranteed that they're going to take those comments as public comment when the public comment process for their permits open. So that's where we are right now, and with no further ado, I'm going to pass it back to Ashley, but thank you all again for coming out. Thank you for being part of this fight.
Thank you so much, Sean. And I'm glad you lifted up that action alert. If you actually look at the fact sheet, if you're here in the audience, there is a fact sheet on your chair with a QR code that will take you to Groundworks action to submit comments to both Eagle and Governor Whitmer. For those online, it will be on the last slide, so you'll just have to wait a little bit longer or head to our website now. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce Frank Edwagishik. He has served as a tribal elected official for 16 years, 14 as the tribal chairman of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians in Harbor Springs, Michigan. During his tenure as tribal chairman, he was instrumental in the adoption of the Tribal and First Nations Great Lakes Water Accord in 2004 and the United League of Indigenous Nations Treaty in 2007. Frank now serves as executive director of the United Tribes of Michigan, as well as on the Great Lakes Advisory Board for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He's a member of the Great Lakes Water Quality Board for the International Joint Commission and is the co-chair of the National Congress of American Indians Federal Recognition Task Force and serves as the president of the Association on American Indian Affairs. He was recently reappointed by Governor Whitmer to the Michigan Water Use Advisory Council. So welcome, Frank. We're excited to hear your remarks.
Thank you. So next slide here. So this is just a heading here, and I'm on to the next slide. This is what we're trying to save. You can hear the waves, you can understand, you hear the birds, you know what's going on, and really in reality, we got to think about what it is. It's that relationship that we have with the lakes and the waters. Next slide. I went to Boyne Highlands when the risk assessment was rolled out. They were talking. The first thing they did is said that there was a 5% chance of an anchor strike, which had happened the week before. Now it was a 100% chance. And so we reminded them of that. The second thing they did is they told us that the duration of an event, a leak, is about 24 months on the average. And then who decides that they're at the end of the event? Well, it's the Army Corps, it's EPA, it's the Coast Guard, a bunch of people working together. And they're the ones that make that decision, and it's sort of hard to put your finger on who's doing it exactly. But then, what's the criteria for making that decision? That criteria is when it costs too much to do any more. Not when it's cleaned up, but when they say, putting more money in this is not gonna, it's a wasteful thing to keep spending money on it. So what does that mean? So after the Exxon Valdez in Alaska, 35 years ago or so, I have friends that live up there, native people who live around there, and there's still evidence of the spill after 35 years on the beaches. It's in the waters, and it's in the aquatic life. If you study, there's warnings about eating too much of the fish or eating the fish from certain areas or any of the shellfish. In other words, this is not something that is going to be 24 months long. As we've talked about, it's a very long-lived item, and this is on part of the ocean. Here in the Great Lakes, that map that we had that showed where the waters would go, where the oil would go in the water, and all of these different issues, it would devastate that water for tribal people in particular because of our relationship to the water. All of this is a situation that is unacceptable in the Great Lakes. And I wanted to open with that. Next slide. I wanted to talk about how we feel about things as Native people. And part of that is the idea that we think of there's 4 direction teachings, east, south, west, and north, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. You've got all of these things, infancy, youth, and middle-aged and old age, but there's these teachings that go with these 4 directions. And the goal of life is to be in balance and harmony, standing in the middle of the world, so to speak, to not be too far in any one of these directions, but to remain in balance with ourselves and with all those other beings that we share the world with. Next slide. And, back one. I guess we missed a slide in there, so go the other way. One more the other way. We're just going to leave it at that. Looks like there's a slide that's missing, but it has things about the 7 grandfather teachings, and one of those is respect. And respect for each other, respect for the natural world, respect for all the other beings that are in that world. And what we've faced in this modern world is a lack of respect. That lack of respect is why we have water we can't drink, fish we can't eat, why we have these human health issues. You heard about all the issues around the refinery, why we have sacrifice zones such as this around the world. These are things because we have a lack of respect for not only for each other, but for the natural world. And this quote is from, next slide now. It's from a fellow named Gregory Kahati, who's one of the Pueblo Indians. He was directed the Native American Studies program at the University of New Mexico. And he wrote a book called Native Science. I don't normally like to read slides, but this one I'm going to read. Western and Native science traditions are very different in terms of the ways in which people come to know, the ways in which knowledge or understanding is shared, how knowledge is transferred from one generation to another, and how knowledge is handled legally, economically, and spiritually. Traditional indigenous law is geared towards restitution and restoration. If traditional laws, and especially those that deal with relationships to nature, are transgressed, then restoration and restitution must occur. If the latter are ignored or mishandled, people suffer the consequences. And this is that part of that, what our responsibilities are. So when we think about, next slide here is the treaties. This is just a brief slide to show you about the main treaties. And the treaty area that we're talking about is this big blue area. That's the Treaty of Washington of 1836. Also, the Treaty of Detroit of 1855 covers that same area. But there are other treaties in the state, and Line 5 goes through many of these other areas as well. So we're not just talking about the tunnel. We're talking about Line 5 in its entirety from beginning to end. But I wanted to show you the treaties because the next slide. In these, we've reserved the rights for hunting and fishing, primarily for fishing, let's say. And, we consider all the natural world to have life. The world can live without us, but we cannot live without the existence of all the rest of creation. We don't think in terms of ownership, but rather relationship. So when we reserved the right to fish, what we did is we didn't go down to the water and say, those are our fish, and reserve those fish in our treaty. What we did is we reserved the right to fish. And that means we reserve the right to pray for the fish, to dance for the fish, to sing for the fish, to catch and eat the fish, but to have a relationship with fish, that was much broader than just catching and eating. We didn't think of it as property, we thought of them as relatives. And so this is true not only for the fish, but it's true for the water and all the other beings that live in it, for all the beings that rely on the water and everything. So when we think about what this does, is that if we do something that, or anybody does something that interferes with the fish's ability to live a natural life and to do things, to do what it's supposed to do. Fish make lots of babies. Lots of babies. Why? Because they feed other fish, they feed eagles, they feed osprey, they feed us, they feed the bears, they feed a lot of other people. They still have enough fish left to make another generation. That's what's supposed to be. And when we do something that interferes with their ability to do that, we're interfering with their sacred duties. And when we do something when that's true, then part of their sacred duties is to feed us. And when we can't eat them because they're polluted, well, we have a duty to work to try to fix that. And a leak would be absolutely disastrous for all these creatures, not just for human beings. Next slide. So how are tribal governments and tribal citizens engaged in ending Line 5? Well, there have been a number of things. You've heard of some of the supporting court actions. You heard some talk about that already. Providing verbal and written testimony at hearings. I was asked to provide testimony for the Public Service Commission hearing, and they had the administrative law judge had said that they would allow testimony about climate change issues, which I know quite a bit about. And so that how would the operation of the line affect climate? Well, I prepared a couple months to prepare the testimony, got everything ready, and I went and I saw, hello, this is Frank Edowagishik. They redacted. Thank you. That was it. They redacted everything I said. After all this preparation, they didn't allow it. But the point is, we made the effort to do it. And we've been doing these kind of things to engage with everyone. The other one is that engaging in international forums that outline the violation of inherent rights and treaty rights. And so when we look at the treaties, we've talked about what those treaty rights are. That's relationship rights. But in the international forums, such as the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, there's the Convention on the Elimination of All Racial Discrimination, and there's other places where tribal leaders have gone to present about this issue. To raise this on an international level, it's a violation of treaty and rights. So we're still fighting on that. And also keeping a broader perspective. I want to go to the next slide here. And in this one, this was when they were doing the Dakota Access Pipeline. This was a demonstration in Washington, D.C. that was right at the Interior building. And we've been involved in every aspect of pipelines, not just unsafe pipelines are things that we don't like to see running. We don't like to see them happening. And we need to lessen our dependence on fossil fuels. I feel guilty because I burned gas in my car when I came down here to speak. We need to figure out how do we lessen that. It is a plug-in hybrid, so the first 40 miles were all solar power, so that's good. But the point is that these are things that we have to do. What can we do individually? We have to individually do things to help break that cycle. And the other thing we do is we have to work together in groups, work with the information that's been provided here, and all these different things that we do. So next slide. This, of course, is just a different perspective. Think about this for a little bit. What does that mean? You look at things from a different direction, all of a sudden you see things that you really didn't see before. And the next slide. And this is a lodge that's in our backyard. I saw this double rainbow coming off the top, and I couldn't resist taking the picture. So with that, I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frank, for sharing your amazing perspective and for your years of leadership on this really important issue. Next, we're going to turn to Brian O'Mara. Brian has more than 30 years of experience providing consulting and construction management support for a wide variety of infrastructure and industrial facilities developments and environmental remediation projects, including more than 80 miles of tunnel and shaft planning, permitting, construction, operations, decommissioning, and reuse. He has worked thousands of hours underground as a resident inspector and a staff engineer for various tunnel and shaft projects in the Great Lakes region, and has testified as an expert witness in the Line 5 matter before the Michigan Public Service Commission in 2023. So welcome, Brian.
Thank you. All right, so I've spent more than 30 years as a consulting engineer, and began my career tunneling in 1987. And my tunneling career spans 5 decades. So I've pretty much seen everything that can go wrong, and they generally do go wrong on these tunnels. And I've also spent a lot of time cleaning up Superfund sites, so I've seen the other end that Frank was talking about earlier as well. So tonight I'm going to tell you about my concerns as a tunnel engineer, technical guy, and I'm going to try to keep it to a level that I won't bore you with all the details, but I've spent hundreds of hours the last 5 years looking at all the Line 5 submittals, the plans, the permits, and the more I look, the more concerned I've become. And this is just a terrible place to put a tunnel, and this is the most dangerous pipeline on the planet, really. And I've sat in the meetings with PHMSA. They're not concerned about this. This is a little bit of their, total portfolio. So it's up to the rest of us to try to make things happen here. So next slide, please. So oil and gas pipelines, there's a lot of them. Probably 1 million if you looked, million miles if you added them all up. But there's easily over 730,000 miles, and 99.99% are not in tunnels. Okay? Enbridge owns 20,000 miles of pipeline. They do have one section of tunnel, so I calculated their percentage that is not in tunnels at 99.995%. There are tens of thousands of tunnels globally. You can't estimate the total miles, but almost none of those contain oil or gas pipelines. And there's a reason for that. It's dangerous to put oil and gas in tunnels. If any of you go through the tunnel between Detroit and Windsor, you're prohibited from bringing hazardous materials through. And that's common for just about any tunnel in the world. So, and the reason they do that is because a tunnel is a confined space. It's not open to the atmosphere. The air is confined. And if you have oil and gas vapors, they can become explosive. You can have a fire, and bad things happen when you're in a tunnel and there's a fire. So, how did we get here? Next slide, please. Well, the state of Michigan commissioned a report back in 2017 looking at alternatives to the Line 5. And this company, Dynamic Risk Assessment, prepared this report. And the tunnel alternative rose to the top. And you might ask, well, why would anyone want to put a pipeline in a tunnel when nobody really does that? Well, Dynamic Risk is a small Canadian consulting firm based in Calgary. Almost all their revenue comes from developing oil and gas pipelines. And one of their clients happens to start with an E and end with an E. How many tunnel experts do you think they have? I went on their website and I put a little search. And it came back, nothing found. Okay. These people don't know tunnels. And tunnels were a very small part of this analysis. Very small, about less than 1%. But they know more about tunnels than Enbridge does. So they knew enough to say, we think this is a viable idea. But before you go through it, you have to do additional studies to confirm all the assumptions that they made to support this decision to recommend this alternative. They assume very good rock conditions, They assume minimal groundwater inflow. They assume no toxic gases or methane. And most importantly, they assume that the tunnel annulus, which is the space between the pipeline and the tunnel wall, be completely filled and backfilled with concrete. Well, you'll find out in the next slide, but none of those conditions became true, okay? And if you look, these are some of the quotes that were in the dynamic risk report emphasizing the importance of backfilling that tunnel to protect it from risks like floods and fires, terrorism, collapse. And it's repeated over and over again that this was the way to do it. Well, next slide, please. Enbridge went out and did a study. They spent millions, but it wasn't nearly enough, and it wasn't nearly adequate to do a project of this scale and this magnitude. They have to do a lot of borings. They didn't put enough in. A boring is just a drill where you collect soil and rock samples. They didn't do nearly enough borings. They didn't go nearly deep enough, and they didn't take the samples where they should have. And despite all those deficiencies in their study, they came back, and the report is open to the public. The rock quality is extremely poor to very poor. They grade rocks on a scale of 0 to 100. 25% of the rock was a 0. Okay, that's bad. Another 25% was less than 25. So if you're, this is the worst rock I've ever seen anyone think about putting a tunnel in. Okay, and because the rock is so bad, it doesn't behave like rock anymore. It behaves like gravel. It's so fractured, and that allows the groundwater to permeate through it. And you're going to have super high infiltration rates of groundwater. Very high rates of groundwater pressures, over 250 psi. And they also found dissolved methane in the groundwater. And when you find dissolved methane in the groundwater, when it enters a tunnel, the methane becomes a gas again, and that's a problem in a tunnel. They also failed to identify that the Straits is actually sitting over the Collingwood shale gas formation. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about shale gas, all the fracking. That's where they're pulling out most of the natural gas. So you have a huge natural gas deposit that is thickest directly under the Straits, and that wasn't even discussed in this geotechnical data report that they put together. And there's just a quote there about the USGS estimating nearly 8 trillion cubic feet of shale gas is in this deposit. So shale gas is lighter than air, so that means it moves upwards. So eventually it's going to make its way to the surface, and it will make its way into the rocks that this tunnel will be drilled through. And I know it happens. I've worked on projects where methane explosions have killed workers, and we have experienced that here in Michigan. In 1971, there was a similar tunnel driven out into Lake Huron. It was a water tunnel, and 22 of the workers were killed in a methane explosion back in 1971. So we have experience. We know what can go bad, and this is just telling, there's just so many red flags here that, you know, and no one is paying attention to it. So let's go to the next slide. These are just some additional safety concerns that I have. We talked about the tunnel design. It's dangerous for the workers as well as the operation. The tunnel can also create sinkholes. So the existing line 5s that are running right above the tunnel could be undermined and actually collapse and have a full bore rupture because of a sinkhole developing underneath the existing line 5s. Okay, you could have an opposite problem. In order to build this tunnel, they will be driving the tunnel boring machine and pumping a fluid around it, a slurry of bentonite. And if they overpressurize that bentonite slurry can work its way all the way up to the lake bottom, causing a breakout or a frack out. This is terrible for the fish. It kills them because of their gills. So it's another disaster that could happen from the opposite direction. We talked about the methane gas. The Enbridge design is pathetic with respect to ventilation. They have no fire foam suppression system, which you would have in any tunnel of this kind. And their plan for fire suppression is close both ends of the tunnel and let the fire burn itself out. Literally, that's what their plan is, which is insane. We talked about geologic hazards. I'm not even sure they can complete this tunnel. It's not uncommon when you're driving a tunnel, sometimes the ground conditions are so bad, they just abandon the mining machine and they just quit. And that could easily happen out here because of the lack of studies. They don't know what's happening over thousands of feet of this planned tunnel route. They don't have a geotechnical baseline report, which is sort of the Bible that any project uses, as both from the contracting side to the contractors, the engineers. Everybody knows the risk, and it's all explained. All Enbridge did is they did a data dump, and they're leaving it to us to figure out what the risks are. Somebody should have distilled all that into a concise document for the regulators that are reviewing this project. That's never been done. And I already talked about the 1971 disaster. I did want to point out that in this is a slide from Enbridge's site. So you see the rock core, that top box, it might be hard to see, but the RQD, or the rock quality designation, is a 0. So that's what bad rock looks like. The core beneath it is more solid, but you can still see some major fractures in there. So most of the rock that they plan to tunnel through is not competent or sound or massive. It's this highly fractured rock, and that's a problem. And the picture on top is a road tunnel in the Alps. And this was a fire, relatively small volume, where a truck caught fire. It caused the tunnel lining to collapse, and there's actually a hole in the top there, that dark brown spot. Now, if this happened 500, 600 feet below the water, guess what's happening? That water is going to come in, and it's going to collapse. And if the pipeline hasn't already been destroyed, it will be destroyed. And the whole design was to provide a secondary containment so the oil and gas never gets out. But it's pumping at 600 PSI or more, and that exceeds the downward pressure that is on the tunnel. So you know how long it takes Enbridge to shut something off. So it will still be pumping at that high pressure for who knows how long, and that pressure exceeds the overburden pressure. So the oil will make its way out into the environment. Next slide, please. Okay, here's the last one. That's one of the headlines from the 71 tunnel disaster. I'm really disappointed with a lot of the regulatory agencies and the stakeholders that have been entrusted with reviewing this project. We talked about Eagle. You know, the first permit reviews were extremely limited. Like Sean said, you know, looking at an acre here or there, while they ignored the 4 miles of wetland between the straits. So hopefully Eagle will do the right thing and address the bottomlands issue and give it the attention it deserves. But nobody there looked at any of the concerns that I've been raising for 5 years. It's been a very narrow review. We talked a little bit about the Public Service Commission. That's where I provided many hours of expert testimony. I looked at all the Enbridge expert reports. They were so flawed, it was almost embarrassing. Their risk, they were supposed to be looking at worst case scenarios. A worst case scenario is not a pinhole in a 30-inch pipe. A worst case scenario is a 30-inch pipe breaking completely, okay? They modeled a bunch of pinholes and said, there's nothing to see here. No problem. So I couldn't convince anybody at the MPSC to take it seriously, but I don't know who the judge was there, but our concerns were basically dismissed. You have the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority. This was created to manage this tunnel in the future. Well, there are a bunch of Michigan DOT folks, none of which, or very few, have any kind of tunneling experience. They actually hired some tunnel consultants, and guess what? They agree with our concerns about the lack of studies, you know, the potential for collapse, flooding, and sinkholes. So they're saying the same thing I've been saying, but you know, there's nothing coming out of that authority. They're just rubber stamping everything and taking everything Enbridge is putting. You've got the labor unions putting a lot of pressure on the governor and others. Yeah, I got a lot of respect for those folks. They're the ones that do the hard work of building these things. But they're relying on people like me and lawyers and others to make sure if you're going to do something like this, it's done safely. They're not experts in this technical stuff. So I just think they're uninformed, and hopefully we can keep them safe, and there's better ways to make a living than put this tunnel in. The Corps of Engineers was talked about as well. I'm very disappointed as an engineer. They actually oversaw the first projects that I worked on back in Milwaukee almost 40 years ago. But as Sean has explained, this EIS is incomplete, it's deeply flawed, and this expedited review is really troubling. So I'm not sure we're going to get a good outcome with the Corps of Engineers. So I'm putting a lot of faith in the governor and the AG and the attorneys that are working as part of this consortium, and the indigenous folks as well, to put pressure back on Eagle. They've got the last card to play, and that's, we got to push to do this bottomlands review. And that's my last slide, and I'll let Liz explain the rest. Okay.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's always troubling to hear, sort of from a design perspective, many of the flaws with this tunnel proposal. Next, we're going to hear some of the legal aspects of this from Liz Kirkwood. She's an environmental lawyer with over 20 years of experience working on water, sanitation, energy, and environmental governance issues, both nationally and internationally. She currently develops and oversees Flow's work on key Great Lakes environmental policies designed to promote work on key Great Lakes designed to promote healthy ecosystems, thriving communities, and access to safe, clean, affordable water for all. Prior to joining Flow in 2012, Liz worked for USAID in Thailand as an environmental attorney to implement a regional environmental governance, water, and sanitation program in Southeast Asia. Liz graduated from Williams College with a degree in environmental studies and history and received her JD and environmental certificate from Lewis and Clark Law School. Liz currently serves as a member of the International Joint Commission's Water Quality Board. So please take it away, Liz.
It's wonderful to be with all of you, and thank you for this wonderful panel. It's a real honor to be with you all, and just gratitude to all of you here in the audience and virtually for being part of this fight. This has been, as Sean described, really one of the most epic battles here in the Midwest for the more than a decade, and we're still here because this matters so dearly to all of us. So my role is in 10 minutes or less to tell you all about the legal issues. I don't know if you've talked to any lawyers recently, but they will talk a lot more than 10 minutes. The first thing I want to, just to help clarify the legal issues, I want to talk about two separate ways to think about this. The first issue, of course, is shutting down the pipeline, okay? And that has, of course, been the priority of our governor and our attorney general. And like Sean was describing, it took the incredible movement and all of the legal work and the advocacy combined to convince these leaders to take real action. And unfortunately, the legal process can be very long and difficult and very frustrating for the public. So I'm going to first talk about those legal cases just to shut down the pipeline. And then very briefly, I'm just going to talk about all of the issues related to the tunnel and also the Wisconsin 41-mile reroute. So just when you think about the larger picture of this, we are facing climate disaster. The International Environmental Agency has said that we cannot build any more fossil fuel infrastructure now in 2025. I mean, we're done building it. And Enbridge is proposing not one, but 2 major fossil fuel infrastructure projects, both the tunnel and this 41-mile reroute. And that, of course, is to continue to put this 72-year-old pipeline on life support. Okay, we haven't even talked about the condition of the rest of the 645 miles of this pipeline. That is, crosses over 400 miles of river, 400 waterways. It trespasses over indigenous, sovereign treaty lands. It trespasses over our public trust bottom lands. And so we're going to talk about that. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here is Sean with A.G. Nessel. She is really a true hero. You have to have leadership at the government level to do courageous things. And this is the most important public trust action in the country. And the implications are huge. Because what Enbridge is saying is they are challenging both state sovereign power and indigenous tribal rights. And they're saying that multinational corporations should be able to trump those sovereign rights of state and indigenous peoples because oil is more important and their profits are more important than our ability to govern and protect the most important thing, which is water. So we have 3 current cases that span in Michigan and Wisconsin. There was an additional case that was voluntarily dismissed, but it's all because of Enbridge trying to jockey and move us back from state and federal court. The other thing I want to just say, I'm going to share a couple of slides that have too many words, and I apologize for that. But the amount of collaboration on this work to support the Bad River Tribe and the state of Michigan is truly extraordinary. With all of the groups from we've had incredible leadership from Bay Mills Indian Community, from Bad River, from the 5 federally recognized tribes at the Straits, the Cora Treaty tribes. We have folks from MyCan and Groundwork and Sierra Club and Earth Justice and Flow and and Environmental Law and Policy Center, and I hope I'm not forgetting anybody, but it's truly a consortium of people who are brilliant and working to do the right thing. So let's talk about Nessel v. Enbridge. That was filed back in 2019 under public trust law and nuisance law, and Dana Nessel said, I'm the trustee as the Attorney General representing the people of the state of Michigan, and we have an oil pipeline that if it ruptures, it will destroy the public trust resources. And usually, if you have a defendant has 30 days to remove the case to federal court, well, Enbridge waited over 2 years. And fortunately, the Sixth Circuit, and it was just back in April, it was in December? Yeah. Anyway, it was recently that the Sixth Circuit just looked at this procedure and they said, oh, it was, untimely and unjustified, and we're going to send it back to state court. So right now, Judge Jamo is in charge, and they're gearing up for the trial to have a permanent injunction. And I'll just remind you, back in 2020, you may have forgotten this, Judge Jamo shut down the pipeline for, I want to say, 78 days because Enbridge discovered that there was like a 12,000-pound anchor, and there was some scrapes, and there were so many problems, and they had to shut down the east and the west leg. And guess what? The gas prices didn't go up, and the world didn't end. And that's because, of course, this pipeline is Canadian-owned, bringing Canadian tar sands back to Canada using our Great Lakes as a high-risk corridor. What else can I just say? The fact that it's in state court is very exciting. It's very positive. It's also very concerning because this trial isn't moving very fast. Now, in 2020, Enbridge filed a, sorry, let me back up. In November of 2020, Governor Whitmer filed a lawsuit to revoke and terminate the easement. Enbridge countersued in federal court because because they think that federal court will favor their option, their case, and so we have a situation where now that federal district court in this countersuit that Enbridge has brought agreed with Enbridge and said, oh, well, the state, of Michigan needs to be in federal court. And Enbridge was making arguments saying that the state is being preempted over a federal pipeline safety law, over a foreign affairs concern, and then treaty obligations from this 1977 pipeline transit treaty. So we've been jockeying back and forth, and the Sixth Circuit, unfortunately, has said that the state of Michigan does not have sovereign immunity under the 11th Amendment of the Constitution, and that Enbridge has to, that the state of Michigan has to, go to federal court and state court, right? So this is not what you want at all. Just last week, the state of Michigan filed what you call a rehearing en banc, asking the entire Court of Appeals, all 16 justices, to review this. Oh boy, see, I'm going to be kicked off right now. I told you it was complicated, right? I'll say Flow and Great Lakes Business Network, we submitted friend of the court amicus briefs to support the state of Michigan. Because how can it be that a sovereign government with the legal, these are the fundamental core properties, public trust duties, they cannot be separated from sovereign immunity, from sovereign rights, therefore sovereign immunity. And it will be a very bad situation if the Sixth Circuit says you have to go to federal court. Okay, next slide. Bad River Band. This case has been so important, as folks have explained here. When you have Enbridge testifying under oath, you really learn the facts, and you know that this pipeline is not needed, and that there are much smarter, better alternatives to go on the Great Lakes. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we were working in the region to, find energy security, water security, and working on climate transition? So in this case, we are, what is most important, I think, remarkable about this case is that there is a deadline, June 2026. That's only a year away. However, where Judge Conley said that we need to shut down Line 5, and that would have given Enbridge, 3 years to do a reroute. Of course, this has been appealed to the 7th Circuit. We've been waiting for 16 months, not a peep. And I'll just say that it's been very difficult because the Canadian government is just spouting Enbridge, lock, stock, and barrel. And the U.S. government really needed to be much more forceful and push back. Okay, Next slide. Okay, so these are when you think about the tunnel and the Wisconsin reroute process, I think about we've got the federal permit, which is very likely to go through. You got and then we've got the MPSC tunnel permit legal case, and that is being appealed to the Michigan Supreme Court. I'll talk about that in a second. And then as both Brian and Sean have alluded to, our last stand really is here in the state of Michigan, related to the wetlands and also the Great Lakes Submerged Lands Act permit. That is public trust law because the state owns the bottomlands, and that means the soils underneath the lake bed. And then we've got the Wisconsin 41-mile reroute. All right, we'll go to the next slide. I'm just going to say one really quick thing about the Michigan Public Service Commission. There's some very bad law that the Court of Appeals put forward. They basically dismissed the legal requirement of agencies like the Michigan Public Service Commission to apply public trust law. They said, oh, it's not statutory, therefore the agency doesn't have to apply it. That is not the law, and we are challenging that, and we've appealed and are seeking, we're seeking the appeal from the Michigan Supreme Court to correct that very, very bad law, that ruling in the Court of Appeals. Okay, next slide. I think I'm done. Oh, okay. So I have two handouts here, and I guess I have two QR codes. But more information about Line 5 and the tunnel, and look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was really great. It's a lot to unpack, and 10 minutes was a tough clock, so thank you. Next, we are going to hear a short video message from Bill McKibben, who really needs no introduction, but suffice it to say he's the founder of 350.org, also founded Third Act, has been a really incredible climate writer, and an orator and author, and so we're excited to be bringing you this special message from him.
Hello, friends. I very much wish I was there with you in Traverse City having some excellent cherries and looking out over the beautiful lake. I'm so grateful for the work that you all are doing. And I just wanted to add my voice to explain one more time why this is a ruinous project and a stupid one. I think you all know all the reasons that it's ruinous. You know, this thing is an environmental disaster in the making, in the most beautiful freshwater in the world. It comes with a huge climate cost. All that oil is, you know, $1 billion a year worth of climate damage over 4 decades. It would release millions upon millions of metric tons of CO2 every year. The latest numbers I saw was that it was the equivalent of adding 7 new coal-fired power plants. All of that is very, very true. And the thing that makes it so stupid right now is that we all of a sudden live in a world with profound alternatives. You know, over the last 5 years, we've crossed some invisible line where the cost of producing energy from the sun and the wind has dropped below the cost of producing it by burning coal or gas or oil. And that's a revolution that's happening all over the world. The Chinese are quickly becoming the first electro-state, not petro-state, electro-state in the world. We're seeing incredibly dramatic changes even in parts of this country. California this year is using 44% less natural gas to produce electricity than they did 2 years ago because they've built so many solar power panels and windmills. Texas, not far behind. really around the world, something like 95% of new generating capacity is coming from renewable energy. And in place after place after place, we're quickly replacing uh, uh, fossil fuel vehicles with electric ones. Half the cars sold in China last year came with a plug attached. And that means that demand for oil in China is now dropping because people don't need it. They're plugging their cars into the sun. All of this is a way of saying, how stupid is it to put up a potentially century-long fossil fuel infrastructure project right at the moment that the rest of the world is headed in the entirely different direction. This thing, you'd call it a white elephant, except it's a oily elephant. It's a boondoggle start to finish. It jeopardizes the Great Lakes. It jeopardizes the state's climate goals. It jeopardizes our sense of sanity about how the world works. We do not need to do this. We should be winding down our fossil fuel infrastructure, not building it anew. So I just want to say such thanks for keeping up the fight here. It couldn't be more important. I remember profoundly that day out on the end of the bridge when we all together helped launch some of the public parts of this fight. And I thank you so much for keeping it going year after year after year against long odds. And there are long odds in this country now. We're at a tough moment politically, especially in DC. And that means that the rest of us, everywhere we can, need to do all we can. You guys are, and I could not be more grateful. Thank you.
Powerful words from a really amazing advocate and ally in this movement. So now we're going to move to our Q&A. I think you've noticed we've got a bunch of passionate folks up here, so we're going to limit the Q&A to about 10 minutes. So we want to take your audience questions. In the meantime, too, we're going to leave on the screen, this is our action alert to send a message to Governor Whitmer and Director Roos at Eagle, encouraging them to really do a thorough permit review on Line 5. So we'll begin and kick it off with some audience questions. And please take action tonight, though, while you're here. Yes.
So this is for Frank Zinn. So have you been back to your property, and is there still visible oil in that area that you can see on top of the land?
And for those online, sorry, the question is just, is there still visible oil on Frank Zinn's family's property? Has he been back there?
We can't get on the property because we don't own it anymore. But driving through, I think the majority, you don't see sheens of oil around. My understanding, though, is that the land is contaminated and it needs to be disclosed in any further exchange of the land, sale of the land. But no, you don't see sheens of oil on the land.
And in the creek and in the Kalamazoo River, it can't be seen. What is it, sunk to the bottom?
And the question is just, has the oil sunk to the bottom? What's left? What's visible that you can see in the Kalamazoo Creek?
I haven't, maybe someone else could answer this question better than I can, but no, I don't think things can be seen anymore but there is 5% of oil is under the surface someplace, sitting there. So I'm sure it comes to the surface from time to time.
Do we have another question? And please project. Yes.
Yeah, I spent a lot of years teaching water resources to engineering students, and I would always try to convey that yes, water generally flows downhill, and here's how you quantify that. And one other point, though, about what happens with water is once you put it into a pipe, it flows towards money. Oil also flows towards money. I mean, people live in the Northeast in our country. They pay a truck to come to their house with heating oil. They hand over money, so oil flows to money.
Yeah, so the question is essentially who is making money from this operation?
Yeah, so Enbridge shareholders are making a lot of money. I think one of the big points here is that if we win this, when we win this, this is going to be the first time that a pipeline is shut down by state action in the United States before a major rupture. And that is really a bellwether for the oil industry as a whole. That's part of why they're fighting us so hard, because even though this is against Enbridge, companies like Shell, ExxonMobil, et cetera, are going to see the writing on the wall if all of a sudden there's a legal precedent for shutting down dangerous infrastructure. So long story short, a lot of people stand to, a lot of shareholders stand to potentially lose some money by this going down. But yeah, that's it. So it's a much bigger fight than that because it's kind of a bellwether as far as shutting down fossil fuel infrastructure.
Thanks, John. And actually, we're going to have a floating mic and introduce our new executive director, Elizabeth Palchik.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Question over here? Sure.
Thank you. You know, I've sat in these meetings for years now. I've been online through a lot of the Eagle meetings. I wonder how much Enbridge has given to this project behind the scenes. This was part of Governor Snyder's agreement behind closed doors. I remember that. And nobody speaks about the fact that the state will be required for 99 years, God forbid, if they should be completed, to keep this going. That's part of this. And I don't like to be negative because you people have done an amazing job of fighting. And the bands and all of the Native American groups that have been involved, I salute you, because it is our future that we're dealing with and our kids' futures. And that's what I question. How much money is behind the scenes that's given to the labor unions that have fought for the jobs that this is going to create? You know, there won't be any jobs if we don't have any water. So God bless you all. Let's continue the fight. But wow, it's been a long process. Thank you.
This is, I just want to respond to that saying that impossible tasks just take a little longer to get done.
Thank you all so very much. I respect every one of you and everybody here. You know, since logic doesn't seem to be prevailing, every one of you has an incredibly thoughtful, smart comment, many comments to make, points to make that have been disregarded. Obviously, there's been successes too, and I'm hopeful that there will continue to be court successes. Since logic doesn't always prevail, this is just a weird question, but since the President of the United States has a bit of a problem against Canada, I mean, is there some stupid approach to this that might be actually helpful right now? I know that there's the money question, and that's a smart one. Where's the money? But hey, we've got some, you know, things that aren't very smart going on that maybe we can take advantage of that.
That's a very good question, and I'll just say, without going into too much detail, the stupid approach is being tried because you have to speak the language of the people you're speaking to. So the stupid approach is being tried to a certain extent. The problem is the oil and gas industry bought his election. So he hates Canada, but he loves oil.
This might have been covered by the previous speaker's statement, but why are why is it so hard to get the MSPC and Eagle and all that to comment on this or to address this in a totally reasonable way? That is their duty to be doing it. It's so obvious. What is the holdup if it isn't that they've been bought?
It's a power problem. Oh, sorry. It's a power problem and a political problem. Logic is not prevailing. We're in like a failing capitalist state where logic doesn't really apply anymore. What applies is power politics, and what we need is a grassroots movement that's strong enough to prevail against corporate money and cost a few people in power their jobs. And I think others have things to say as well to that.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of these meetings with these different regulators, and what I hear from them is they're so afraid of being sued. They take a very narrow view. We got to stay in our lane, and we can't look at that, even though they know there's bigger issues. So it's partly, blame the lawyers. They're afraid to get sued. So I don't think they're all bought off and corrupt. I think there's still a lot of decent people in government. But this is what they've told me in some of these meetings, is that if they go out of their lane at all, they know they're going to get sued, and they're afraid to do that. So that's been the problem with this all along. In my opinion, no one's taking a holistic view of all these issues, and so these different stakeholders are just looking at their little part, and Enbridge is dividing and conquering. That's what's been happening, but it doesn't have to end that way.
Yeah, I would just say that they started down the road allowing some climate issues to be talked about in the permit, as Liz was talking about earlier. But the point is that what happened here is they narrowed it down and they decided they couldn't take those. But they initially thought maybe they could. We were talking about the impact on fish, the impact on CO2, and all of these different impacts. But they didn't allow that in the end, and it's because of that view. And yet it's still very obvious and very, plainly out there.
I agree. I think each of the agencies is trying to just be in their own lane. And it's very scary for the MPSC, for example, to look at the whole line, right? I mean, that all of a sudden is a can of worms for them because, by just limiting it to those 4 miles, same thing for the Army Corps, it's a problem that they can solve, right? They can sort of balance and think about the risk. But when all of a sudden you're looking at the project as this large fossil fuel infrastructure as a conveyance for, I was thinking about this right now, 2 million gallons have gone through that pipeline through the Straits. So they're just not willing to kind of stick their necks out. The climate change analysis and impacts it was uncomfortable for them, and now it's extremely uncomfortable.
One more question. I think we've got one more.
Yes,
back
I was
here.
going to say we've got time for about one more
Okay,
question.
Here we go.
Hey everybody, I'm Peter Zinn, brother to Frank up there. I just had, one question about, I've lived in New York for the last 20 years and I now live in Traverse City. And I'm trying to figure out what to do here locally, and some of the organizations that are making money are the business owners here that are supporting Enbridge, running ads, things like that. I work in the arts. I love Interlochen, but every day I listen to Interlochen Public Radio, and I hear every 90 minutes an ad, constructed by Enbridge, trying to put a spin on this thing that makes me want to get sick to my stomach. And I'd encourage everybody in this room to reach out to Interlochen Public Radio and address this issue. But I'd love to hear from the team here how you suggest we approach this kind of initiative that's happening locally here in northern Michigan.
I said this before and I'll say it again. How many of you are supporters of Interlochen Public Radio? I no longer do. How many of you are supporters of CMU Public Radio? Stop. Let them know that you object to their taking Enbridge's money to advertise, to try to dupe us. It might make a difference.
Yeah. This,
I got a call.
you know, I've been on boards where we had to wrestle with this very question. And part of it is that, you know, there's a lot of people who believe Enbridge is right. There's a lot of people believe that we need this pipeline. And they are also part of the public, and they are part of the people who support these same institutions that we do. We can apply pressure, but, you know, I love public radio. And public radio is under attack. If we don't support it, it may go away completely, not because we didn't give them money because of Enbridge, but because it may just go away because it's under attack now. So I would say that while that's good to let them know, if you write a check to them, put it on there that you protest. You know, let them know that you don't like this. But you've got to, you know, it's better to change things from the inside than it is the out. So that's why for the last 20 years, I've been a member of Farm Bureau, because I disagreed with some of the Farm Bureau practices, but I felt it was stronger a position if I was a member that I spoke up than if I was speaking from the outside. And that's just something I think that all of us can benefit from. We do need to speak up. We do need to talk about these things. I've been on boards where I voted against taking any money, but the majority of the board decided that they would, because there were a significant part of the donors to the organization that believed that had money invested in Enbridge or other places. So we're part of the public. What we try to do is get our position out there, make sure that we're getting this thing done the best we can, but we can't do it if we isolate ourselves. So I'm sorry to disagree with you, but I'm really, you know, I think it's really important to think about these things. Thank you.
Well, and if you do plan to cancel your subscription, please feel free to make a donation to Groundwork Center, Oil and Water, Flow, any of the great organizations here tonight.
And you got local Traverse City organizations like Groundwork and Flow and others who are doing excellent work on the ground, and they're great organizations to join and be a part of. And one person at a time makes a difference. Talking to one person at a time is the way we get these things done. So, I mean, talking to people who are hearing $8 million of Enbridge PR directed at selling them on this project. You know, the best influencers are like neighbors and friends, trusted people and things like this. Polling bears that out, that the best messengers are people who you actually know. And organizing doesn't happen, mass movements don't happen all at one time. They happen one person at a time, and they grow from there. So the best thing you can do if you care about this is to be at things like this, and then to talk to people in your own life. And that doesn't necessarily mean posting on Facebook and getting into a bunch of stupid fights that don't really matter in the big scheme of things, but talking to people one-on-one is a great way to do it.
Well, I just want to thank all of our incredible panelists for being here tonight. We could not do this work without you. We are just so incredibly grateful for your partnership, for your leadership, and for really making this the movement that it has become here in Michigan. I also want to thank this audience, those who joined us in person, everyone online. We are just incredibly grateful for you being here tonight. Showing up is so important, building this community, and moving the ball forward. We have a lot of work to do in the next year, and it really depends on all of you. So I also want to thank the Alluvion for hosting us, and Nobo for serving drinks. And yeah, just finally want to thank our incredible partners, Oil and Water Don't Mix, Sierra Club, Progress Michigan, For Love of Water, and Clean Water Action for being a part of making this event happen. We could not do it without you. So thank you all. And now we're going to hear from Sean's band. So please stick around, grab a drink, have a conversation with one of our panelists. Really appreciate all of you.